Welcome to Reason and Theology, a show dedicated to apologetics, discussions, interviews, debates, and more. The hosts are Catholic, but also welcome charitable conversations with Orthodox, Protestants, and non-Christians. And welcome to the Reason and Theology show, everyone. I'm your host, Michael Lofton, on a Tuesday evening doing our second stream for the day here with Dr. Nicholas DiDonato, an Eastern Orthodox theologian, and actually second-time contributor. So welcome back to the show. How are you?
Well, my pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me on again.
Yes, sir. I really enjoyed the last show. It was great. So
it was a lot of fun for me too.
Yeah. I enjoy people like yourself where we can have charitable conversations. We might not agree on some substantial things. Some people think that I'm a relativist. No, I recognize that we might have some substantial disagreements. That's fine. At least we can do so in a charitable way. And so I really appreciate people like yourself. So you're a breath of fresh air. Especially
well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm kind of an oddball being an Eastern Orthodox who actually loves Thomas Aquinas. So I am very sympathetic to Catholic position in many ways that I think my fellow brethren are not.
I really appreciate the Byzantine Thomists. I do. But, hey, the Orthodox who aren't Thomists, that's fine. As long as they're charitable,
right, exactly.
Yes. That's fine. Really, in our topic here again is essence and energies. I haven't come to any definitive conclusions. And I don't know if I ever will, but I'll just kind of tell you where I'm at. I would say that Gregory Palamas, when it comes to the distinction between essence and energies, I personally don't have an issue with it. And I think that that particular issue can be integrated into Thomism. Some people call it, like Dr. Mark Spencer, a reformed Thomism. I think that particular issue can be incorporated. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you have some comments on that here in a moment. I want to hear them. But that's just kind of where I'm at. Now, there might be some viewers. I know we have some new viewers, so there might be some who don't even know what we're talking about. They don't even know what we're discussing when we say essence and energy. So maybe start us out and explain what exactly is the distinction between essence and energies? And then let's maybe talk about whether or not, this can be found in the early fathers, whether or not it could be reconciled with Thomas, whether or not there could be a reformed Thomism, and we can get into all that. So start us out with the very basics.
Sure. So concerning the very basics, I'm going to interpret this very broadly so that we can include the early fathers. So we can include people like Proclus and Saint Dionysius the Areopagite. I'm going to try to define this a very broad problem because I find that some people who critique it are looking for very particular Greek words. If you don't have those words, like, nope, it's not there. But I'm not really convinced that means it's actually not there because particular words aren't used. Because obviously words take time to develop, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm saying. So first, what is the problem that the essence energies distinction is trying to tackle? So I would argue that it has to do with how we understand apophatic and cataphatic theology. So apophatic is the how language is limited and can't actually accurately or at least fully express God. So when we say something, we also have to then negate that thing. We have to realize there's always a limit, or some ways in which we say things is false about God. Though whereas cataphatic theology is the affirmative, like, yes, here are positive statements we want to make about God, like God is love, God is good, God is being, God is truth, et cetera, et cetera. But then the apophatic side says, well, there's a sense in which God is beyond being, God is beyond love, God is beyond truth, et cetera, et cetera. So the dilemma comes in, what happens when you say, I'm always going to prioritize the apophatic over the cataphatic. I'm always going to say whatever cataphatic statement you're going to throw at me, I may agree it's true to a certain degree, but I'm going to say it's ultimately inadequate to describe God because it's going to present some kind of bounds on God. It's going to limit him. It's going to do something. It's going to bound God in some way that is inappropriate. So however true it may be, it's limited. So this is the dilemma that whatever cataphatic language you're going to use, it always gets trumped by apophatic language. So enter now the essence energies distinction. The essence energy distinction, again, I'm interpreting this broadly to include people who don't use those exact Greek words, is when you say, I'm going to say that the way God presents himself to the world is, again, with particular words, be it being or truth, or it may be, but all of those words are going to be inadequate to who God is in himself, in his essence. This is going to be utterly unknowable, truly ineffable, beyond being, beyond intelligibility, just unknown. So for example, I'll circle back to Gregory Palamas, because he is probably the most famous expositor of this position. He's certainly one of the most sophisticated of it. But you look at someone like Saint Dionysius the Areopagite. He borrows from Proclus the idea that God is the unparticipated, in which case you're always going to deny everything of God. He sets this up early in the divine names in book 2, and you see it's repeated again in books 11 and 12 as well. So you say God is being, but God's also beyond being. God is
Right.
this, but also God's beyond that. And then his mystical
Right.
theology is very clear, clearly negating just everything you could possibly say about God. God is even beyond God. God is beyond Trinity. God's beyond all these things. So this is what the essence energy distinction wants to do, that the energia, or whatever the person is using, be it the participations of Proclus, or be it the divine names of Saint Dionysius, whatever it may be, all these things make present the divine essence. They make it known in a finite and inadequate way. So you always can say, yes, that's true, but that's not fully who God is. Transcends even that. So I think what people, and correct me if I'm wrong, find alarming about Gregory Palamas is he often uses like this around language, how the energia are around God. And people think, well, then there's some kind of intermediary between myself and God. And really God's somehow unknown, or maybe God's not simple. And they kind of like get really worked up about that. But I would suggest that actually, if we look at Saint Dionysius, he has this wonderful analogy where he compares God to the sun, and how we actually don't see the sun itself. We only see the sun's rays. No one has actually seen the sun itself. We only see the sun's rays. But it's not because the rays are blocking us from the sun. The rays are revealing the sun to us, but we don't see the sun itself. Now, perhaps when the sun burns out, we can see its core, sure. But at least for the time being, no one has actually directly seen the sun. The rays communicate to us. The rays make accessible to us the sun. And if there were no rays of the sun, we couldn't see the sun at all. It's actually exactly the rays of the sun that make the sun known to us.
Right.
That's why we have the sun, through the rays. So it's not that the rays are some kind of intermediary thing that's not truly the sun. No, the rays are truly in and from the sun. They are around the sun, such that you can't access the sun's core directly without going through and with the rays. But the rays are some kind of foreign thing, some kind of like third entity, some third party. They are genuinely of the sun itself. And so they're uncreated. This is why you have this idea that the energia are always uncreated. They're generally of God. They generally reveal God. Same thing with the divine names. The divine names are uncreated. They genuinely reveal God. They don't hide God. They make God intelligible. Again, if the sun didn't have rays, we would never see it. We would, as far as we would know, there'd be no sun. So the sun's rays makes the sun knowable, accessible, able to be enjoyed by us. So otherwise, the sun would be beyond visibility, just like God would be beyond being, beyond intelligibility, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the essence energy distinction basically tries to do. It tries to preserve the apophatic, the transcendence of God, while also affirming the cataphatic in the way God is made immanent in the world, made present in the world, without ever forfeiting God's ultimate, like it's trying to say Trump, ultimate ineffability. So that's how I would define the essence energy distinction, which again, lets me include people like Dionysius, Proclus, and others as well, even though they don't really use those terms, to my knowledge, at least.
So many places I want to go with this. Let me start with this one. There was a theologian, JP, I don't know how to say his name, Houdret, to my recollection. I don't know how to pronounce that. Houdret.
Okay.
I think it's French. Anyways, he wrote an article about the essence and energies distinction in the Cappadocians. And he posits that they taught the distinction, but only ad extra, not ad intra. Then when you look at Palamas, he's quoting the Cappadocians, and the quotes that he's given of them seem to be ad intra.
Yeah.
So we come across language in the Cappadocians that they seem to deny the essence and energies distinction. And then they seem to make that distinction. How do we account for that? Now, I know Barlam brought this up too, uh, and Gregory answered it, but what's your answer there? What do you think?
Well, uh, to be uh, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not familiar with this article. I'm only barely familiar with this particular problem. So let's make sure I
Mhm.
understand what the problem is first. Is the problem that they're saying there's an essence energies distinction within the Godhead itself, within the
Mhm.
Trinity? Is that
There, what the argument is that some are saying the Cappadocians did not teach that there's an odd intra distinction, and some are saying that they did teach it's odd intra, within the divine being. Um, so could you maybe clarify for that when we come against these apparent contradictions? How do we reconcile that?
Yeah, so to be honest, I would have to go back to the primary text. What I can do is maybe offer some theological reflections on it. So I
Yeah,
don't want to,
let's hear
because
them.
I'm
Yeah,
not
sure,
really
sure.
an expert in like
That's
the
fine.
Cappadocian writing, so I can't be
Yeah,
really
no,
like
that's
in
fine.
this book, this person says this, because that's not something
Right.
I'm able to do off the top of my head.
Sure. No,
So
that's not a problem at all.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I hope that's okay.
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely. But what are your thoughts though? Just kind of as a theologian, what do you think?
yeah, so I would say if people are willing to grant the ab extra, that's to me is the part I'm most interested in. Now, whether there is an essence energy distinction within the Godhead, my guess should be it's understanding God the Father as the or he or the source of the Godhead. Is that sort of the line of the critique from Barlam and from
Yeah.
this French thinker that so
Yeah.
there's a sense in which God is, the Father is the arche, and then the Son, of course, is a perfect image of the Father, and the Spirit proceeds. So so I guess my thoughts are that can work depending on what the problem is. Right, it goes
Yeah.
back to the original uh, way I was framing this question
Yeah.
is what is the problem you're addressing?
Sure.
Is a problem you're addressing the inter-Trinitarian relations?
Yeah.
Well, then, if that's the problem, if you want to have a way of understanding how is the Father truly the He or the source of the Godhead, then this perhaps could work.
Mm.
So it depends. Now, if you're trying to say something else, maybe it doesn't work. So I think we should be careful not to just look what people are saying in their theology and not understand what are the problems they're trying to address. Are they trying to defend hesychasm, right? Like
Mm.
Palamas was? Are they writing against a particular pagan audience? So
That's true.
what is sort of the
That's a
reasoning
good
there?
point.
So this is why again I say I don't know the history of this
That's a good
particular
point.
issue, so I'm not really able to speak on it. But I would say that I could see where there could be a legitimate way to use that ad intra distinction to make sense of the Trinity. But I would say, and I would be very surprised, having not read all of Palamas' writings, but I would be very surprised if he said that's just absolute period, and
Mm.
that God's understanding doesn't even transcend that. In
Yeah.
other words, this too has to be a kind of stopping point, and even the heart of the Trinity is actually transcends our understanding. Maybe he does. Maybe he denies that. Again,
Mhm.
I'm not,
Mhm. Sure.
but I would be surprised if he said that. That yeah, this is absolute. The ab intra essence energy distinction works. The Trinity works like this, and we're done. We've solved the Trinity. It just doesn't strike me as something Gregory Palamas wants to say. But again, I'm not a Palamas scholar. I study more earlier times, like the earlier Neoplatonists. That's more my area. So it's possible Palamas does say that, but I'm not familiar with it if he does.
Yeah, no, and those are fair points that you made. Here's some of the concerns that Catholics are going to have when we talk about the essence and energies distinction. One of the concerns that a Catholic is going to raise is, okay, um, when we see God in the beatific vision, I know this is entirely, not entirely, but more Western language. When we see God in the beatific vision, we see His essence. At least that's the way I understand the West. There's strands in the West.
Right.
We see His essence, but we don't comprehend it. We perceive it. we grasp it, but not, exhaustively. Um, but the essence and energies distinction seems to say that we don't even apprehend the essence at
Right.
any given time. And then I've heard others try to kind of reconcile both the East and West on this matter. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that the Western tendency that leads to the idea that we can see the essence of God, apprehend it, do you think that can be reconciled with the essence and energies distinction?
Yes, and I'll try to do it from both angles. So from the Thomistic angle, so God's essence is subsistent existence, right? It's pure act. Its act is purest. Now that if we take that, this is for Dionysius, the second highest divine name. That if we grab the essence of existence itself, that we can
Wait.
apprehend.
Can you repeat that?
Sure.
You're noting that Saint Dionysius taught the second greatest divine name is that God is pure act. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
being, yes, pure being.
Pure
So
being. But would he affirm that God is pure act?
well, I guess I'm just assuming pure act to be pure actual being. I don't think Dionysius say God has potentiality or has potential being
It's a
within
good point.
himself.
That's a
So
good
I
point.
so and I'd also say, and this seems to be forgotten, I think, that Neoplatonists had Aristotle. We
Yeah.
call them Neoplatonists, but it's because they synthesized Plato and Aristotle. You'll
Yeah.
see, especially Plotinus and others, you just distinguish between actual and potential being. So these distinctions aren't lost to Dionysius. So I think if he wanted to say God had potential being, he would say that. But I just don't think it seems to me obviously not what he's saying. He's
Yeah.
talking about being itself,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is clearly not potential being.
Right.
So anyway, so
And
yes.
I agree.
So
I only bring that up just because there's some who maintain the essence and energies distinction that fight against any kind of pure act language and just think it's ridiculous.
yeah, I know. Yes, like I said, I'm odd in that I am very sympathetic to the Thomist position, even though I'm not a Thomist and I'm
Right.
Orthodox. I think I'm not
Right.
supposed to do that.
Right.
But yes, uh, no, like I said, I think you will find this distinction made even in the Eastern Father. They're aware of Aristotle. It's not like they're ignorant of Aristotle.
Mhm.
So it's just that they're not reading Aristotle, through Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina and these Muslim guys who have their own tradition, and but where they actually prioritize Plato, which of course is scandalous during the Renaissance. You have these Greek guys coming over saying Plato is the king of the philosophers, and people are like confused in the West. Like Plato, he wrote like a small little work on the Timaeus. What's that? But anyway, that's all different tangent. But yeah, so I think because it's interesting, because earlier you said that you were willing to take sort of the essence energy distinction and put that within Thomism. I would do the opposite. I would take sort of Thomistic theology and make that sort of a subset of Palimism, of God,
Okay.
God qua being. I would say I could agree with most of what Thomas says as long as it's God qua being. I'll
Okay.
fit there right in there, divine name being. I can affirm most things of what Thomas Aquinas says.
I don't think
Um,
Aquinas would argue with you there.
Oh, he would, yeah, because he would argue that being, he absolutely argue with you there. I agree. I'm just saying how right. You're asking, one. You suggested one way to sort of make it to reconcile. I'm saying I actually think the opposite
Did
is
you
also
you think
possible
it could
too.
be synthesized? Mhm.
Yes, I think if you take Thomas Aquinas' thought as kind of a subset of basically the divine name being in downwards, and I think obviously to make some kind of modifications. I think you can't really deal with his view of beauty, for instance. He does seem to be better about beauty in his commentary on actually the divine names. I think you'll find his most sophisticated treatment of beauty there. So if you go to the Summa, if I recall correctly, he just says that beauty is how we physically receive being, how the senses of the physicality receives being, which is very kind of low view of beauty, as opposed to in Dionysius, beauty actually is equivalent to the good which transcends being. So it's a very all this, yeah, I'm not in any way trying to say that you could just slap them together and everything's gonna hum along beautifully. No, you do have to realize where they disagree on certain issues, like the priority of the transcendentals and these kinds of things. My only point is that a lot you can affirm Thomas Aquinas, like God being pure act, if you understand God in a limited sense of the divine name being.
Mm. I don't know if you saw Father Kappas was on the show a couple times, and he came on and he spoke about essence and energies, and I asked him about reconciling the West and the East when it comes to the vision of God, and I might butcher what he said, so I apologize, Father, if you're watching. But the best that I could understand it to my recollection, I think he was saying that there are some energies that are essential, and it is those that we will apprehend um, in the beatific vision, but not necessarily his essence, if I understood correctly. And he was saying that, the actual magisterial interventions that defined the beatific vision are ambiguous on this point. So even though it might not be the common way to in the West to understand the beatific vision, it's still within some of the parameters offered by some of the Scotists, which are entirely Catholic. So you're able to hold to it. That's the way he tried to reconcile it, and that might be a great reconciliation. I'm not critiquing it at all. I'm not able to. Um, what are your thoughts on that? However, do you think that that's a legitimate way to reconcile East and West here, to speak of some energies that are essential energies?
Well, I guess my mind went actually to focus on the essence part.
Mm-hmm.
So if the idea is that the essence of God, if I'm understanding Father Caps's position correctly, can't even be apprehended, then that would seem to be in line with the Eastern view. And so if that's the case, then yes, then we could discuss perhaps about which energies are essential or not. But to me, the core point is, what do we mean by essence? What do we mean by God's essence? Do we mean that which is beyond being, goodness, etc., beyond all these things, or do we mean the very essence of being itself? What do we? So that's where I think any kind of reconciliation has to
Well,
start, is defining
can,
our terms.
can you clarify that for me? You're saying, explain that distinction for me again, because I think this is very important. When you said that the East can affirm that we can apprehend God's essence, if I understood you correctly, what
I
did?
was saying it seemed like the Father Cap's solution, it was denying that we could apprehend God's essence, which is what
Um,
the East would agree with.
yeah,
Now, if he's saying you can apprehend God's essence qua essential energies, again, that's perfectly aligned with these, because it's you're
that's what I
apprehending
think he
the
was getting
energies.
at, is that we
So
can apprehend the essence through essential energies. I think that's what he was getting at. And so,
yeah, if it's true, again, it's kind of tricky than what that language means, because the whole point of the energies, which is kind of an awkward
yeah,
English translation for viewers who don't know, this is a common, actually, New Testament word, and it's better translated, operations, commonly, as one of probably those common New Testament translations,
right.
operations or activities. So anyway, yes, that is how the divine essence is communicated to us, just like the sun's core is communicated to us through its rays. That's right. So, but we receive the sun's rays. Do we directly receive the sun's core? No, but do we have some finite glimpse of it? Only qua the ray, not qua
Okay.
the core.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, so so
But
maybe I'm just understanding
yeah.
Father Caps's position well enough here, which I apologize for
Well,
that.
I might be misrepresenting it. So again, we'll need to go back and watch it. Watch it for yourself, and you know, let me know. And of course, viewers, y'all gonna watch it as well. Um, when we speak here about essential energies, what's that opposed to? What other kind of energies are there?
That's what I was going to ask Father Caps, actually, if he were here. I would say,
Mhm.
what are the, because all the energies are supposed to communicate the divine essence. That's what they're supposed to do, reveal
Mhm.
the divine essence in a finite, limited way, such that the divine essence transcends each of those energies. Perhaps, now, clearly, at least in St. Dionysius, some communicate that better than others, right? So that
Right,
they're all
right.
equal. Right? He puts the good in being. So perhaps,
Yeah,
and again, I wish Father Castor here, so I'm sure he would have
yeah, yeah. I
a
don't want to
very
speak
clear,
for
a
him.
very
So
excellent
yeah,
clarification. I Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that mean in terms of which energies are not essential. Now,
yeah,
perhaps this is more true to Polemas's language, where we have certain, like, theophanies or Christophanies, like the burning bush or whatnot. So perhaps we could say those really aren't essential. Why we could have had the history of the world without perhaps the burning bush. In a way, we couldn't have the history of the world without goodness, right? Those two aren't quite on the same metaphysical plane. So perhaps that's what's meant. Because, like I said, I'm construing this problem very broadly. So there, people would, like Palamas, for instance, right? He would say that, the energia is like any instance, and go to all these very concrete biblical examples. Whereas I'm like bird's eye view here, right? I'm not in the kind of layer. So perhaps that's what Father Capps means, is that there's certain revelations of God of Himself via the energia, but ones that aren't like the transcendentals, or ones that aren't metaphysically necessary for there to be any kind of existence in the first place. I'm just guessing what he may mean by
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I don't know. Um, it seems like there are some energies that I guess manifest the truth of God more than, let's say, maybe um, God or Jesus walking on water. Let's just take that one. Jesus walking on water. Um, there's some energies going on there. I don't really see how they immediately connect to the truth of God. Um, Whereas God, teaching truth through sacred scripture seems to connect a little bit more. I don't know if I'm rambling here, if that makes sense, but it seems like even though those energies might be related, one seems to manifest something that's essential about God over the other. What are your thoughts on that?
No, exactly. Yeah, and that's how I was understanding Father Capps' statement, is that there are some
Yeah.
things like this is a great example. What if Jesus never walked on water? Well, I don't think that would be terribly significant, right?
Yeah.
Now, if there were no sacred scripture, again, that's a whole level, that's a whole
Yeah.
different problem. That would be
Yeah.
much more serious. Like I said, or if there were no being, obviously there were no being in the world, that would be a very serious problem in a
Yeah.
way that Jesus walking on water is not.
Now,
So yeah,
sometimes,
I definitely can see that there's some energia that are essential to reality, to essential to knowing God. So we have to make those kind of distinctions as well, whereas others are not. Because again, like you said, the energia is just whenever God is revealed.
yeah. Now, sometimes we hear that the energies are manifest. St. Basil talks about that. But then sometimes we hear them talk, spoken of as one. Can you explain that? Are there diverse energies, or are they really one, or is there a sense in which they're diverse and a sense in which they're one? How would you explain that?
Well, yeah. So that's a great question. So yeah, this gets into the kind of distinctions we're going to make, right, between the different energia, between the different divine names. So certainly, in the Thomistic tradition, yeah, he's going to argue that it all is always one, right? So basically, goodness reduces to being, truth reduces to being, all these things reduce to being. Um, but actually, I think someone like Proclus, for instance, makes a great point that because I'm going to butcher him probably a little bit here, doing this off the top of my head, is that because reality is whole, reality obviously is one, these diverse things have to have a principal source, a first principle, ties all these things together, which he calls the unparticipated. This is that which is beyond all being, which we all call God. And so all I have to say is, even if we want to get really persnickety about, well, can we really collapse this transcendental into that transcendental? Even if we really can't think of a way to do that, for example, being in oneness, right? Or being in oneness as transcendentals able to be collapsed into each other, um, in the Neoplatonic tradition, the answer is no. The one is beyond being, like with Plotinus and whatnot. These things actually cannot be collapsed into each other. That's really not problematic because, again, what we're saying is that in God's essence, he is beyond all these things. It's precisely the essence that holds all these things together. So the essence preserves the simplicity, which technically also is beyond simplicity of God, and preserves there being any kind of ultimate, yeah, I guess that's right, ultimate division, ultimate metaphysical division among the energia, such that if they weren't united, they'd be in fundamentally different realities, which obviously they're not. The world we live in has being, has truth, has goodness, has beauty. It's clearly not, these are clearly not fundamentally different realities. Otherwise, we wouldn't live in a reality that has all these things.
You would
So
say
I
that
think God's transcendence is exactly the point of God's transcendence preserves all that. That's why it's beyond all that. So even if you get stuck and you say, I cannot get these two transcendentals to be collapsed into each other, the point is that they point us to God, and that is the ultimate reality.
you would say that God's essence is simple, and yet God's essence is beyond simplicity.
Yes. Because anything I would affirm, I'd also have to negate. So I would say unity is a divine name, oneness is a divine name, but God transcends even that. And
Yeah.
Plotinus says exactly the same thing. It's in the fifth Aeneid, fifth tractate, chapter 6, I believe. That's exactly what he says. He says the one, ultimately have to get past the name the one. The one is just a name, it's a placeholder. Eventually have to go even beyond that.
Hmm.
And even for, say, Dionysius, if I'm not mistaken, when he does the treatment of the name the one, it's pretty far down in the list. It's like one of the later chapters of the divine names. It's not one of the earlier chapters. So the idea is that God has to transcend even our ideas of unity, even our metaphysical notions of simplicity, because he is that which holds all that together as the font of all reality. That's beyond the reality that we know of, that's here. But that reality, again, communicates God to us as
Yeah.
being, as beauty, etc. So
I'm glad you clarify that, because a lot of people, when they read Saint Dionysius, they think, what? God, God is beyond being. Wait,
yeah.
what? Does that mean that the essence of God doesn't have being? Then it doesn't exist if it doesn't have being. And so,
Oh, I know that is, I know.
but that's where most people are going to go when they read that. They think, wait,
Yes.
if he's beyond being, then it doesn't have being, so it doesn't exist.
Right. To which I would encourage them to go back and read book 4, where he says the good holds together both being and non-being. And he's like, we
Of
ask,
the
well, what do you mean
divine
by
names,
non-being? He's like,
correct?
whatever that can mean. I forget the exact phrase that he uses. He's like, whatever sense there could be non-being, that's also encapsulated within the good. So book 4 makes clear that God's ultimately good and beauty, right? The beauty and love, eros, right? All that's there in book 4, and then being comes after that. So, and this is, the main reason for this is because of Plato. In book 6 of the Republic, Plato talks about the good as that which illumines being, makes being intelligible. We know what things are because of the good. I understand what this computer I'm looking at is, or the books you have in your background, your beautiful icons. I know all that because of what's good. That's how I understand being. So, and this is something that, you know, is why, for me personally, one of the reasons I'm not a Thomist, because I would say that God is beyond being. That yes, there is a sense in which being has preconditions, goodness, oneness, arguably beauty as well, that are beyond being, as preconditions for there to be being in the first place, and that has to be accounted for.
Can you explain to us what exactly are the logoi? We hear this brought up a lot with Saint
Yeah.
Maximus. What exactly is this?
Hope it's okay if I pronounce them Lohi. I hope that's
Yeah.
okay if I. Yeah.
No, no.
So
However you, sure.
yeah. Um, So yeah, so my understanding about and this is something I'm actually currently doing some more research on. So the logos logi distinction, this is a similar kind of pattern. They're all each. This is going to be confusing because I'm going to use lowercase lambda, or lowercase l, logos participates, reveals the logos, right, the Son of God, the very Son who becomes incarnate in Jesus Christ through the Virgin. So all those would point back and participate in the Son. So I think what Maximus is doing, and again, as I should warn everyone, as not a Maximus scholar, you should take everything I'm saying with a huge grain of salt. Consult Father Maximus, Nicholas Constant, Dr. Nicholas Constant, if you consult him, on these particular issues, because he's just amazing, with Neoplatonism and Maximus and how all these things are intertwined. So anyway, I would understand that as saying Maximus realizes that there is a sense in which the principle of the Godhead, the Father, is already made intelligible by the Son. And though it seems to me that Maximus then channels all of that we've been discussing with these distinctions about how is God intelligible directly through the Son, which seems to be incredibly appropriate. That then the Logos then is like the ultimate way in which God is intelligible, but obviously communicates us to the Father, but yet also as Godhead, as Trinity, is beyond being. So it seems that Maximus is able to sort of work within this realm, but emphasize rightly the role of the Son. Because I know one of the critiques I hear about the energy distinction is that it loses the Trinity, right? Or loses the Trinitarian idea. So it seems that Maximus, with his emphasis on Logos, on the second person of the Trinity, is trying to make that evident how it's present.
Some ask, well, let me rephrase it. Some say that the essence and energies distinction allows us to um, communicate God in creation ad extra better than some solutions that Thomas have offered. So, how is it that this undivided, beyond being God, so he's even being beyond undivided, beyond simple, beyond being. How does this infinite God, beyond infinity, how is he communicated into creation into a finite way? How does the essence and energies distinction bring us God in a finite way better?
Yeah, so just basically summarize Saint Dionysius, God is being to things that be, life to things that are living, intellect or wisdom to things that are rational or wise. So God is all in all. As this is important now, so it's not pantheism, right? As the divine names. So we communicate, we understand God as revealed in being, in goodness, in life, in justice, in wisdom, and all of these things. These all point us to our very revelation of who God is. These are all pointers to the divine essence, to actually being able to reveal the divine essence, because that's impossible. Just like it's impossible to see the sun's core. You see the sun's rays, you can't actually see directly the sun's core, but the sun's rays, in a sense, communicate the sun's core in a way that's visible to our eyes.
Seeing the
Just like the
essence
divine names
indirectly.
communicate to us. Wait, go ahead.
We're seeing the essence indirectly through the energies. Would that be accurate or no?
That's a great question, actually. As I worry that even indirectly is too strong. The divine. So I would say that the divine essence is communicated in a limited way, but that limit is precisely the totality of that particular divine name, such that what you get then is that divine name and not the essence. So
Okay.
it's from uh, the divine essence. It surrounds, right, the divine essence. Right, that's used Palamas's language. But then what you get is the energies. That's what you actually communicate with, because the essence is ultimately incomprehensible. And that to me is really the line is: are you able to understand it? Is it intelligible? If it's intelligible, it's not the divine essence. And I guess I would go back to my question with Thomas Aquinas, is that does Thomas Aquinas hold to the idea that either what's being is not intelligible, being is not intelligible, don't deny that very fundamental principle that, to my knowledge, Thomas don't want to deny, or else explain how is it we can apprehend the divine essence? So, and again, so that's the advantage of the essence energy distinction, saying no, you actually can't even apprehend, never mind comprehend, you can't even apprehend the divine essence. But what can be apprehended, even if not fully comprehended, are the divine names. Like, who can fully comprehend beauty itself, or being itself, or goodness itself? Right? These things cannot be fully comprehended, though they can be apprehended.
I think I know where you're going to go with this, but for the sake of our viewers and listeners who aren't
Yeah.
familiar, they're going to ask, okay, wait, if we don't ever actually see the essence directly or even indirectly, how does this not lead to atheism? If all we ever know and participate in are the energies, how does this not actually lead to atheism, that there is no God, or that we can, or agnosticism, that we could never know God? All we can ever know are his energies. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I would say I think the more alarming concern should be pantheism, because what I'm saying is that God is communicated in being. That's everything that exists. Everything that exists is a symbol of God. Or to use a word for Thomas Aquinas, is a trace even of the Trinity. Everything is a trace, a reminder, a symbol of God, a pointer back to being itself, which is a revelation of God. The whole creation is a theophany, a revealing of God, but not, if you stop there, it's pantheism. But
Right.
because God transcends all of that, transcends all the divine names. So I would say the opposite. It's like, if you're worried about atheism, you have the wrong worry. You should make sure you preserve God's transcendence. You're going to get some kind of pantheism. That should be
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
concern. I think that would be a more on point critique of the
Yeah.
doctrine. because
Well said.
there's nowhere God is not.
Yeah.
God's even beyond being. You can't even go beyond being to escape God.
Mm.
God's in the goodness of all things, the beauty, the truth, the wisdom, the life. Again, he's
Yeah.
life to things that are living. He's life itself to those things that live.
Yeah.
He's our ultimate telos, where we find fulfillment. We to use sort of a technical Neoplatonic term, we revert because we
Yeah.
want our well-being, which is something Maximus also picks up on. Right, we want our well-being, so we want to participate in our source, which is also our telos or our end.
Mm.
So I would say, like I said, pantheism should be the concern of the critique. Atheism, I think, it makes no sense. Atheism is nonsensical in this scheme.
There's a question here from John DeRosa. He has the Classical Theism podcast, and he has a really good question here. If God has never created, how would the energies be different, if at all?
If God never
If he
created,
never created, would
yeah.
the energies be different?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, you know, actually, if I'm not mistaken, there's actually debate among the Orthodox on this very issue, right? So, if there's no creation, in other words, are the energies or the divine names purely relative to the creation? Are they the very horizon of the creation? So, if there were no creation, could we say God is good? Right? Is that really the heart of the question?
Right.
Yeah. So I would say, to my knowledge, at least, this issue actually hasn't been settled. I'm more than happy to be mistaken. If someone knows of some dogmatic statement on this, please do send it my way. But to my knowledge, this issue has never been settled. So if you were to ask me personally, which I'm assuming this is going on,
Yeah.
I would say that. So you have to look at the divine names, the divine name life. In what sense could their God be life itself when there are no living things? But that doesn't really make a lot of metaphysical sense to me. So what sense could God be being if there is no being? Again, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you're saying, well, God is. Yeah, again, it doesn't make any sense, because the whole idea is that this is a way God reveals himself as being. Well, if there is no being, then that's one less way God could have revealed himself. You say, well, God is really being. Well, if God's really being, he would reveal himself as being. But there is no being, right? That's the counterfactual, right? The counterfactual is there's no being. So then God didn't then, in fact, reveal himself that way. So
This
I hope
one,
I'm answering this person's question. I'm saying that, it's more than just it's relative to us, because we're talking about transcendentals. So to say that this particular transcendental is there is to say that transcendental is not part of reality. But once it's not part of reality, it seems that the problem kind of goes away. Because you can't, in other words, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, let me suppose hypothetically there are beings that can receive something and then pretend they're not. Well, they either have to be absolutely not there, because if they were there, then God's communicated, in fact, as life, as wisdom, as rationality, etc., and all that's there.
this one is from Benjamin.
The physical universe changes, and therefore God changes and whatnot. The the energies of divine names, they're not like parts of God. They're a revelation of God himself in an intelligible way. Because again, if we don't have an intelligible way, we're left with the truly, utterly transcendent, ineffable God, and that this cannot be communicated. There would be actually no reality. Kind of go back to a previous person's question. If it's not communicated discreetly as the divine names or as the energia, then there's just no reality. Because reality is nothing about. I think that's the problem. We're sort of trying to separate reality from God. Reality reduces to a symbol of God. Reality completely reduces to God's revelation of himself in creation. And so so a lot of these questions, I think, presuppose that can be separated off, like pantheism. We say there's a separate part, the physical universe, and that's kind of like an organ or an extension of God. Well, no, the universe is revealing of who God is, not as some kind of separate organ, not in an open theism way, but I can't think of any word than transcendental. But perhaps if that's not helpful, dimension's an okay word, though that's obviously problematic.
Mm. This one If all divine names are presupposed by the name goodness and are made manifest as multiplicity in creation, then why reject a virtual distinction between the energies?
Why? Oh, I see. I see. So if everything ultimately reduces to goodness, well, because it's a little more because it's a little complex than that because it's not just goodness. Dionysius there also puts beauty on the same part, and how goodness and beauty are kind of the same thing, but they're also not obviously. And the same thing with eros and love, agape, right? And eros are also put there too. So you have really these four terms in book four. Again, you have agape, eros, beauty, and goodness. So it's not as simple as he says, well, there's goodness as sort of a sub-contained category, and then I can reduce everything to goodness. It's actually a very complex category, and it's not clear. I think perhaps what you could say, um, you could have perhaps a modal distinction where you say these are different degrees of divine goodness. I think that uh, might work. I'm actually not even uncomfortable with a formal distinction, and just to say, these are two different things, the same reality for the divine goodness. I think that works too.
Hmm.
All I have to say is for the virtual distinction, you actually have to take all the names within book four, goodness, the two kinds of love as well, and beauty, and say these are all really all exactly the same. And that's, I think, might be difficult to do. But they're certainly related. That's why he treats them in book four. And like I said, one of the advantages of the essence energy distinctions over Thomism is you're not forced to always use the virtual distinction. As a Thomist, it feels like to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you must appeal to the virtual distinction. You must always say everything ultimately reduces to being. Goodness, beauty, oneness, unity, all these things must reduce to being. Otherwise, you're denying divine simplicity. The flexibility of the essence energy distinction says, you know what, even if I can't make everything into a virtual distinction, it's okay. Simplicity is not being violated. Again, admitting that God is beyond even simplicity. It's able to keep everything together.
This is
So
where,
all to say, but I also should add, at the end of the day, though, I wouldn't be opposed. So just to be clear,
yeah.
to answer the question directly, I wouldn't be opposed. If someone said, you know what, I really want to maybe take all the names in book four, the divine names, make them all goodness, then make all being goodness, make all life being, etc. I wouldn't be super opposed to that, but it's just not clear to me that that's the best approach, and it's certainly not needed. It's not required by the
Mm.
essence energies distinction the way it's required in Thomism.
Yeah, what some Thomists, Reformed Thomists like Dr. Spencer, what they do is they throw out the virtual distinction and incorporate the formal distinction into Thomism.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's an option. Indie Irish asks, are you saying that creation was necessary?
Oh, I'm saying the creation was necessary. I'm saying that. So first, no, right. Obviously, it would be heretical to say that the creation is necessary. What I am saying though is that in the way that God created in a way to reveal Himself. So maybe I should back up, discuss why is there creation. Creation is there ultimately because God is love, right? That's foundational to the gospel. It's also why eros, agape, is the first of the divine names with goodness in pseudo Dionysius. So the creation is there because this is how God reveals Himself out of love to us. So this is why the purpose of life is theosis, deification. I'm not even uncomfortable actually saying the beatific visions. I understand what's meant there. I'm not really terribly super opposed to that. I just think it's limited for reasons I already explained. So that's the purpose. So did God of necessity have to create? Well, obviously that's absurd to say because then you're putting some kind of law of necessity above God, which is just impossible. God is love, and so God loved us in this way by revealing Himself to, again, return all things back to Himself. Not that I have to imply universalism. I should clarify that, especially after recent discussions, right? I'm not implying you must subscribe to universalism, but I'm saying, that would be the ultimate purpose of creation. So all of that to say, did God have to create? No, but the way in which God did create is to bring all beings to Himself by revealing who He is. This is God creates by revealing who He is and then creating things out of nothing from that.
This one is,
Am I answering this person's question? I feel like
yeah,
I'm starting to rant. I apologize. So,
and y'all can put your follow up questions in there, but I think that was good. What is Parker asks, what is the relationship with essence and energies and the icons? Are the energies present in the icon?
to the degree that they reveal divinity, yes, to that degree. It's like we were saying in our earlier conversation. These things do have degrees. There's a sense in which goodness is reveals God much more strongly than simply God, Jesus walking on water. But yes, and certainly in Orthodox theology, icons are understood to be participatory. They really do reveal. They're called windows into heaven. I often tell my students the way I think of this is that imagine you spent your whole life in a prison cell with no windows, and then someone finally for you cut out a window you could see outside and see the beauty of nature. These were icons do. Icons were trapped, sort of, not literally traps, that's too strong a word, but we typically we think about only worldly things of this world. That's what we do, often of our own volition, not necessarily that we're trapped per se. So I retract that statement. But the icons show us the saints in eternity. They show us this is the kingdom to come. It's already foreshadowed more powerfully in the sacraments, of course, right? This is certainly a foretaste of the kingdom to come. That's the icons do. So yes, the icons do participate in the divine energies because they communicate to us the kingdom as windows
Um,
into the kingdom.
ASIC asks, what does John of Damascus mean by God being one energy? And how does that relate with the essence and energies distinction?
That is a great question that I cannot answer. Maybe you could send me an email or something. I'll look up where he says that and try to get some idea. I need to read more John of Damascus, so I apologize. I cannot answer that question. But that's
Yeah, no,
interesting.
no
That's a
worries.
very legitimate question, and I would love to read where he says that and get an idea for the context.
Yeah, because I mean, you'll find stuff like that in some of the fathers, but then you'll find them where it seems that they talk about multiple energies and make a distinction between essence and energies, and then they seem to conflate them. And so,
Yeah, and I
um,
also say that from my position, if you were to find a father, even who explicitly denies this, it wouldn't be fatal to my position, because I'm arguing primarily from a metaphysical point of view. So this is just how orthodoxy is. You often find fathers who don't agree with each other. So I see my task as saying, which makes the most sense of reality. Because what theology is about. Theology is about reality. What's real, what's true, what's eternally true and real. That's what we care about. So even if it were the case that St. John of Damascus completely disagrees with my position, hopefully it doesn't mean I'm heretical, right? Hopefully there's no actual definitive dogmatic statement against my position. That would be a whole different problem, right? But I could then point to people like St. Dionysius, Gregory Palamas, Maximus the Confessor. So I could say, you know what, even if St. John does disagree with me on this point, he also disagrees with these other people. And so I'm not necessarily in the worst of company.
excellent. We're right about out of time here. So what I want to do is go ahead and give you a chance to put in a plug for anything that you're working on. Are you working on any kind of books or articles or anything that's upcoming?
Yeah, so actually, I have been working on for years now. Actually, this article. It's because long story short, I have three small children, 3, 2, and 6 months. So I just do not have the time. I'm
Yeah.
Orthodox, right? So I just don't have the
Yeah.
time to work on that. And every time I
I
look at the
get it.
article, I reread it, I hate it, and I end up rewriting it. And I'm
I
in the
get
process of
it.
doing this again, which is why I haven't gotten around to submit it. What I will do though is maybe put in a plug for the ACCS, the Association of Classical Christian Schools, which is where I work. I teach theology and history there. Especially if you have a Protestant listening to this and you're interested in church history and these kinds of things, I would strongly recommend, if you're able to afford it, send your kid to an ACCS school. They will learn rich church history. They will learn rich theology. They will learn about the transcendentals. If they have B, they will learn about the essence energies distinction. I mean, these are the things that we're trying to teach. Even if you're Catholic, as I'm sure some Catholic high schools have definitely gone on the liberal side.
Right.
That's just so. If you are a conservative Catholic, actually one of the best ACCS Catholic Christian schools came up in the news because of the domination of Amy Barrett, right? Her family is part of one of the absolute best ACCS ACCS schools in the country, if not the world, and that's a Catholic. So the ACCS, sometimes they're Reformed, like where I teach, sometimes they're Catholic, and there's an Orthodox one that came out of Pennsylvania. So I would just say, if you're worried about educating your kids, worried about secularism, want to make sure they get a good, sound theological education where they can understand the kind of conversations that we're having on this show, then I would just recommend an ACCS school.
Excellent. That is awesome. And I want to have you back on again. Any topic that you want to do, let's do it.
That'd be awesome.
Do a roundtable.
Last for me. Yeah, I would. Let's do a roundtable. Maybe have an atheist in there. That would be great.
I think that
I still stand by my claim that I think atheism is just incoherent.
I can set that up, right? Yeah, I can set that up if you want. There's a few atheists on hand that would be willing to do that. Let's do it. I'll talk to you about that off the air.
Okay, that sounds good.
And he goes, I appreciate you coming on. This was awesome. It was fun. Again, you're welcome on anytime. And it sounds like we'll probably set either a roundtable or a debate, one of the two, with an atheist. So more to look forward to there. Excellent. Well, again, thank you for coming on. Everyone, thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share it on your social media. Also, go to patreon.com/reason and theology if you would like to support us. Until next time, God bless you all.